Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcouch. We're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers Podcast, and this is another Q&A episode. Tara Quintana is back to continue this ongoing saga of Q&A, and we're trying to answer as many questions that you, the listener, the viewer, the tribe, the patient, the person who's struggling with chronic immune health, thyroid conditions might have. So, Tara, welcome back to the Thyroid Answers Podcast. I think this is Q&A number somewhere around number 11, number 12, somewhere in that range. But welcome back for another episode.
Thanks, Eric. It's great to be back.
All right. So, how are we doing? Are we getting close to the end? Not really. Okay. So we'll see how these come in. I think the good news is if we're getting, as we do these, if we're getting more questions that people have, then we'll keep doing them, right? And we'll keep doing them until we run out of questions. But let's get started. Let's try and get through more than 4 or 5 of these today and see if we can crank out a bunch of them, okay?
Sounds great. Okay. Can hidden food sensitivities or allergies be contributing to my thyroid symptoms?
Sure. If you've got food reactivity or food intolerances, that's going to upregulate the immune system. Anytime we upregulate the immune system, that can potentially trigger inflammatory mechanisms. If there's an upregulation of inflammatory mechanisms, that can affect T4 to T3 conversion, and it can also potentially impact what's happening at the gland itself. So I'd say, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you answered that question perfectly, because I absolutely agree that the thyroid is going to be react to all of those things, like you said. So
perfect. That's easy. Let's move on to the next one. That was easy.
That was an easy one. Okay.
We might get through like 10 of these. But
maybe.
Let's go.
How can I address persistent inflammation that might be affecting my thyroid function, but not showing up in standard thyroid tests?
Well, none of the thyroid tests are directly going to show inflammation, right? And what we might see on a thyroid panel is, depending on what's going on with the physiology, when there's inflammatory mechanisms, what we might see is a number of different scenarios on the labs. We might actually see a suppression of TSH below the reference range, because the inflammatory mechanism may actually increase signaling at the pituitary and the hypothalamus, at least in the short run, and that may result in a lower TSH. So you might feel hypothyroid in an inflammatory state, and your TSH either is inappropriately driven into the normal range when you should be elevated, or driven below the lab reference range when you should be maybe in a more in what we would call the lab reference range. The other thing we might see is we might see a reduced conversion of T4 to T3. Now, if you don't run T3 or free T3, if you don't run total T4 or free T4, guess what you're not going to know? You're not going to know if you're converting T4 to T3 appropriately. And just a little side note on that, I do think a lot of people, like when they're running a thyroid panel, kind of cheat the system and say, well, only free hormone matters for T4 because that's only what's available to get into the tissue. And I don't think that's true, because if you have a low free T4, you could have a normal or elevated T4, but low free T4. And I have a set of labs that I went through this week where the person was told that they had, they were put on thyroid medication because their free T4 was low. But when we looked at their total T4 in the labs before they started medication, their total T4 was like 10.6. So if their total T4 is 10.6 and their free T4 is 0.8, it's not that they need more hormone, they need more hormone free. So giving more hormone also increases binding globulins, which doesn't necessarily change the amount of free hormone. So we might, that's one of the things we want to see, though, is that are we converting T4 to T3 optimally? And I like the free T3 to free T4 ratio to see that. I like to put them in the same units to do the ratio. I know other people just use, I think ODX, which is Weatherby's website, they have a calculator where you don't have to convert them to the same units, and their ratio is different, but I use similar units because that's what the literature uses, and use a range. And if somebody's ratio of T4 to 3T3 to 3T4, it should be between 0.31 and 0.34. And if they have they have an inflammatory state that's going to reduce the conversion, that ratio is going to be less than 0.31 in most cases. Okay, so that's what I'd look at. And then the third thing we might see on a thyroid panel that might indicate there's inflammation would be an elevation potentially of reverse T3. And the last thing we might see would be potentially some positive antibodies indicating there's some type of immune inflammatory process. But if you really want to know if there's inflammatory mechanisms going on and what to do about them, it may be helpful to look at inflammatory tests, right? So they may be helpful in helping us understand what's going on. So what can somebody do to reduce their inflammation? Number one, a good lab assessment and looking at inflammatory markers, CRP, homocysteine, fibrinogen, ferritin, uric acid, alkaline phosphatase are just some of those markers. And then the other thing is, without any testing, and you and I have talked about this before, is just start raising your level of health and fitness and what I call the fitness factors, right? You don't really even need the test. If you have an inflammatory state, then something in those fitness factors is not very fit. And so your level of fitness in your diet is not very good. And we can have that argument all day about what should it be. It should be a whole food based diet. That's what it should be. 80% of the time, it should be a whole food based diet. If you're not sleeping or attempting to get 7+ hours of quality sleep per night, then you should work on that. If your respiratory rate is above 10, you need to work on your breathing, right? If you're a mouth breather or a snorer, you need to work on changing that. If you have a lot of emotional stress and a lot of emotional burden going on, and a lot of negative self-talk, which you and I have talked about recently, you have to address those things. You got to change those things, right? If you have a bad relationship, that's going to create stress. You got to figure out how to either fix the relationships or get out of them, because if you can't fix them, why stay in them? And that sounds cold-hearted, but that becomes what we need to do, right? So it is what it is. If you're unhappy with your job, change it. And you can say, but I need this to produce for my family. Well, if it's producing income but destroying your health and well-being, I don't know that that's a great job, right? We all make changes all the time, and we do live in the land of opportunity where you can really make almost anything out of nothing in this country with the right mindset. So, I think the default answer should be, how do I improve my inflammation? Improve your fitness factors, right? Figure out which is the weakest ones and start improving them. And then if you're trying to identify if you have inflammation, then you have to run inflammatory tests to really see and get a clue as to where the inflammation may be coming from. Okay, perfect. What else you got?
Yeah. And I love that you brought up about the free hormones, the free T4, T3, and the total, because I think that that's missed a lot, that we're not looking at the whole picture. So we're not getting a complete, although I never really feel like it's fully complete because there's a lot of other contributing factors, but it's much more complete than just looking like this, where we're not getting the full picture. And it could be a whole other episode for over medication, which happens a lot. And when you talked about the different things and the fitness factors from your book, I absolutely agree. And I always, like, when I'm working with somebody, say, what do you want to do? Like, what are you willing to do? Where do you want to start? It doesn't have to be everything. I actually think if somebody has chronic inflammation, looking to overhaul their entire life overnight, which there's some people that's the strategy. They're like, I'll do it all. I would argue that that's more inflammatory. It's raising stress levels. It's like, I like easing into things more. So like, for them to pick an area, like, where is the lowest hanging fruit? Like, what are they willing and able to work on? because we can make a dramatic difference with our like health, our inflammation, our outcomes, even with like minor, like I call them like micro changes. Doesn't have to be all or nothing. And actually, when you brought up jobs, like if we're at a job that we hate, and I feel like I talked about this before, that I was in a job for 2 years. I hated it. I cried every day. I went to work like this. I don't know. I honestly don't know how I got through it. And interestingly, it wasn't long after that that all of this happened, right? Like I caught Hashimoto's, and of course, I didn't just catch it, but like things got like aggravated. And going back, if I could go back, I can't. So I can't change the past. But future Tara, I will not put myself in a position ever again where I am in a miserable state, no matter what, for anyone, not for my husband. Hopefully he's not putting me in a miserable state, for anyone. So like for the listener, we have the capacity to change a lot of our circumstances, even if it feels like we don't. But it starts, we were talking about this previously, it starts here. Like we have to believe it, that we have some kind of control over what happens to us. And we have to be willing to make changes, or at least start with a micro change. So that's what I would add.
Perfect. Let's get the next one.
Okay. Actually, this is fitting with it. How can I determine if I have a conversion issue with T4 to T3, which might explain my ongoing symptoms despite normal TSH levels?
Yeah, so I think we kind of discussed that. One is you can look at the free T3 and free T4 ratio. I mean, you can look at T3 and you can look at free T4 themselves, but I think the ratio really tells the better story, because sometimes you could have maybe a free T4 that's within the lab reference range and a free T3 that's within the lab reference range. And you might assume that there's underconversion because the T3 is maybe outside the optimal range, right? Or that you might have free T4 in what somebody might call an optimal range, and free T3 outside that optimal range, but they're both within the lab range. And you might assume that because free T3 is outside what somebody's optimal range is, that you have a reduced conversion. But when you actually do the ratio, you see that no, they're actually doing a pretty good job converting T4 to T3. The ratio is appropriate. So then we have to ask other questions, right? Which is, okay, then is the lower level of total T3 or free T3, why is it low? And that's where we go back to the total. Well, what do I have to start with? If I only have free T3 and my free T4 is 1, but I have a lower total T3 and a less than optimal free T3, we might assume that we just have a reduced conversion. But really, the reason the numbers may all be low is because I don't have much total T4 to start with, right? And so we might see that in the pattern, like, okay, what's reverse T3? We might see that it is low as well, or at the low end of the reference range. And so, hey, there's not much T4 here. Therefore, there's not much free. And therefore, if there isn't much free, I can't make as much T3 total, but I am converting what I have available at an optimal rate. It sounds confusing, right? But does that make sense?
I thought it made absolute sense.
And then the other thing we could do is we could take a look at the rest of the labs that we actually run. And we might say, yeah, but you talk about lipids all the time. And in this scenario, the lipids are still a little bit elevated. Well, they still might be a bit elevated depending on what somebody's range is, right? And I think the number less than 200 number is bogus, but that number the cholesterol, LDL, HDL, especially cholesterol and LDL, should really be age dependent, not somebody's statin dependent number. But we can look at the rest of the labs, even if there looks like appropriate conversion, we might still have a tissue hypothyroid state. Like even if I have really good free T3 to free T4 or free T4 to free T3 conversion, if I don't have optimal, like higher levels of total T3 in the blood, I could still have high cholesterol, even though I have pretty good conversion. It's just I don't have a lot of the starting material because the liver, especially, is highly dependent on the amount of T3 in the bloodstream. So the conversion could be good. I don't have much T4, therefore I don't have much T3. But what I do have, I'm converting well. But because there's not an overall appropriate level of T3, that could result in elevated lipids, that could result in elevated problems with cortisol production and sex hormone production, because I can't get the cholesterol out of the bloodstream and into the tissues. There's pretty good conversion, but not enough total available hormone being made by the gland or from a supplementation standpoint.
Yeah.
Did I answer the question or did I get off target?
I think you expanded the topic, but I think it was important because essentially we need to be looking at like the whole person and not, I don't think, and I don't practice this way, only looking at a few markers. We need to see the whole picture, the expanded picture. And even when it comes, like you brought up, don't get me started with total cholesterol. I had a woman yesterday actually send me a message that her total cholesterol was like 205 and they wanted, like the LDL was like 112, wanted to put her on a statin for me to like to know what I think. And I've already done expanded lipid testing on her and she got the thumbs up for me with her buoyant, large fluffy LDL and like her pattern A. So I feel like we need to, as practitioners, we need to dig deeper. So for the individual that wrote that question, we need to be working with somebody that's willing to listen, right? Will hear the concerns, but then of course I wonder, like, what's the motivation behind the question? Because there's a lot of talk, and I know we've talked about this before, with a lot of people feeling like they're not converting well, so then we just bypass it. Or if reverse T3 is too high, bypass the body's way of doing things and just give, straight T3, which may or may not be appropriate. So I think that there's a lot of variables, because we've talked about before, I do a lot of genetic testing. Now, I'm not running genetic testing looking for this. That's not why I do it. It's a much bigger picture, and it needs to be like the person, they have to want to know this information, because it's a lot. It's a lot of information to know. So I agree that it's a bigger question than just what it asked. Like, I feel like it's a loaded question.
Yeah. And I think we should just touch on this real quick with the lipids. When you get your general lipid done, triglyceride, cholesterol, LDL, HDL, VLDL, when you get that panel done, a physician really does not have justification to prescribe a statin based on just that. What we're looking for is the oxidizable. Are your lipids getting oxidized? That's really what we want to know. And so you could do what Tara said, you can do a VAP panel and these extended panels that look at particle sizes, and those can be done. The other thing you could simply get done is ApoA1 and ApoB and bring it down to that level. If ApoA1 is high or normal, you're in pretty good shape. If ApoB is high, you've probably got more oxidizable issues going on, right? And so you could now, but if somebody says your LDL is 119, like, okay, but I'm 65 years old. What should it be for a 60? What's healthy for a 65-year-old? It's not under 100. That is, the literature doesn't show that a healthy cholesterol, a healthy cholesterol for somebody under 60, I believe, is up to 240. It's like maybe 150 to 240. I think 150 is actually probably too low. from a cholesterol standpoint, because you need cholesterol to make cell membranes and
Mhm.
into neurotransmitters and into hormones and to all this bile and everything else, cortisol. So if it's too low, and you see this a lot when people have low cholesterol, they, their sex hormones aren't regulating well. They say, hey, I've been diagnosed with adrenal fatigue, right? You don't have much
Mhm.
cholesterol. Like what do you think you're making it out of, right? And so we don't want to drive it too low. And the literature doesn't show that under 200 means you're not going to have cardiovascular risk for cholesterol.
Mhm.
Matter of fact, we have more people. I think there's been many papers that show today we have more people dying with low cholesterol and LDL than we've ever. uh, And the reason is because they're on these medications that are suppressing, artificially manipulating cholesterol, LDL, HDL, but not actually addressing the root issue. So they still have the cardiovascular inflammation and oxidation of their lipids. And that's where that ApoA1, ApoB, or that VAP panel comes in handy. Hey, I took a statin and I lowered my cholesterol. Great. Let's take a look at the lipid panel, the VAP panel, or the ApoA1, or you can run a bunch of these, Apo little a, ApoB, but the real simple version of it is ApoA1 and ApoB. And if that pattern is one of oxidation inflammation, it doesn't matter if your cholesterol is 100, you're still in trouble,
Yeah.
right? So for the listener, be very cautious about getting on these medications, because not only can they lower cholesterol, but there is a lot of side effects that go along with these things. And a lot of people, it's not addressing the root cause anyway.
Yeah, that's vitally important. And I actually have the ApoA1 and ApoB on my expanded panel, along with even a few other things. And because we need more information. And
Hmm.
so many individuals, then they end up with extreme fatigue, because these medications, they're going to have downstream significance. And
Hmm.
definitely anyone listening, don't stop your medications because of anything we're talking about, but it does matter. And having that conversation to dig deeper is always going to be my preference. Then it's even when it comes to supplements, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of supplements, and I use these supplements in my practice that can help with cholesterol levels or anything in the body, right? But
Yep.
that's still a band-aid.
Yeah.
I prefer that approach to a pharmaceutical, and sometimes I'll use that while I am working with that individual, because it's especially depending on what body parts we're talking about and the level of it. Like, I'm not against pharmaceutical drugs either. I
Mm-hmm.
prescribe medications all the time, but that individual that we're working with, or for the listener, whoever you're working with, there needs to be the communication for, what other options do I have? What are the downstream potential or likely side effects? How, like you said, then somebody showing up with adrenal issues.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then what is that going to do when we have significant adrenal dysregulation? We're more in the pathway of developing chronic diseases.
Hmm.
When we have the further into adrenal dysregulation we go, and when cortisol becomes like flatlined. One of my tests when I was at my worst, don't run tests when you're at your worst, but I did it. I had like an almost flat line, and I had no energy. Like, I could barely get up, so like the further we get down this dysfunctional pathway, it's impacting all of our hormones, everything in the body. Then we're more in the line of fire to develop something else. So it might seem like, oh, just get on the statin, it doesn't matter, but
Hmm.
it does. It does.
Yeah. And there's one last thing I'll say about the ApoA1 and the ApoB is, just in case you knew this was coming, if you look at the scientific literature, people with low T3 tend to have a low ApoA1 and a higher ApoB. So that's why one of the reasons I have it on my what I call my elite metabolic panel. I have it on there because these are people who are typically already in a more wellness-based state. And so we're taking a look at kind of some of the a little bit broader parts. But if I have somebody who's got reduced T4 to T3 conversion, they got hypothyroidism, they got inflammatory markers, I don't care what their lipids are, I assume they're going to have a lower ApoA1 and ApoB. So I don't necessarily run it. Now, if they said my doctor wants to put me on a statin because of where my cholesterol is, I'm like, okay, well then let's just run the markers that they should have run to make the decision to put you on. And those are the markers that we should be more concerned about. But usually it never comes to that because people understand that the cholesterol, in time, I've already educated them that the cholesterol is really not the issue. It's what's happening to the cholesterol. So if we can reduce the inflammation and oxidative stress, we're going to see less oxidized cholesterol, and we're going to see less inflammation. We're going to see better conversion, and we're going to have the answers we want anyway. All right, let's go to the next one. See, we're cruising right through these.
We're cruising through it. Okay, what is the role of selenium and other minerals in thyroid health, and should I consider supplementation?
Well, so I think it's naive to consider that because my thyroid gland's not working well, that I can take some minerals and they're only going to go to where I want them to go. They're only going to go to the thyroid, right? I'm going to take magnesium and I want it to go to the thyroid, so it's going to. I'm going to take selenium and it's going to go to the thyroid gland and it's going to support optimal homeostatic regulation. It's a great thought, but the vast majority of people who have thyroid-related issues aren't in homeostasis. They're in allostasis. They're in a stress state, and they tend to have some challenges to begin with, right? So more of these things doesn't necessarily fix the issue, right? Like if I have a bad spark plug in my engine, more gas doesn't change the way the engine runs, right? I have to have some, but more doesn't make it better. If you have active thyroiditis going on due to some type of cell stress response, more magnesium is probably not going to help your gland make more hormone if it's an adaptive downregulation. That being said, you do need minerals and some of these cofactors like selenium to help with production and help with conversion. So should you start taking supplementation to improve those? I would say no. The first thing you should do is look at your diet and say, if I think I need selenium, how about I eat some selenium rich foods? Am I eating those things, right? Eat those things first. Can I maximize my nutritional intake with whole food based products? That would be my number one. Number two, if you need copious amounts of selenium to support the thyroid physiology, and you're already eating selenium rich foods, then we have a different question to ask, which is, why is it not working well, right? Why do I need so much? And this is where we could do some additional like testing and say, okay, one of the reasons I have a reduced conversion of T4 to T3, and this is a good scenario, right? So the person maybe has appropriate levels of T4, their TSH is maybe elevated, their T3 is lower than it should be, and reverse T3 is lower than it should be, right? We might look at this and say, what's going on here, right? They just need T3. Well, I would say no. What we might have, this might be a case where we have insufficient selenium, or we've got something competing with selenium for conversion, for selenium to help, because selenium is the enzyme that selenium is the cofactor that helps all of the deionases convert T4 to T3 or T4 to reverse T3 and T3 to T2. If we have reduced T3 and we have reduced reverse T3, then we can maybe assume that I've got a selenium issue. A lot of people, when they see low T3 and high reverse T3, assume that they have a selenium deficiency because their T3 is low. But if the reverse T3 is high, then they must have enough selenium to do that, right? So what might impact that or inhibit the selenium? And there can be a number of things, but probably one of the most common things is arsenic that we're getting from our, our antibiotic-free chicken that we're all eating, right? Because we didn't like antibiotics in our chicken, so now they switched to arsenic in the feed to be an antimicrobial. And now you're seeing people who have higher levels of arsenic in their system, and arsenic will bind up or I guess bind selenium and prevent its utilization for the deiodinases, and even impact the level of glutathione production because you need selenium for glutathione production. So I think that is one of those things. Those nutrients are key. There's a lot of nutrients that are needed in the thyroid gland: iron and zinc and magnesium and selenium. There's a lot of micronutrients that are needed, but I don't think you should be looking to say, I'm going to just make sure I add all these individual things. My suggestion would be, if you're worried about an individual micronutrient, check to make sure you're eating that individual micronutrient. And then if you think you need additional support you can't get from food, I would probably lean towards more of a multivitamin formulation, in my opinion, than an individual micronutrient, because in real food, we're not getting an individual micronutrient at massive dose. We're probably getting the micronutrient we need and probably some other things we don't realize we need. And so I would probably lean that direction. And I might even, before that, even lean towards more organ-based meats that we don't consume. Because you could say, well, I can't get it from my food because I'm eating this white chicken breast and I'm eating this other stuff. And you're not eating the stuff that's as nutrient dense and nutrient rich. So for me personally, whole food based, digestive enzyme, organ blend, multivitamin. That's like my order, because I think as close to we can get to eat from nose to tail from that whole animal, we're going to get the most nutritional values. And I'm not anti-plant either. I mean, I eat those things, but when we're thinking about what can we consume, like for me, that's my personal order.
Well, I hope the listener was taking notes, because you just gave this amazing masterclass of such value. Like, when this is aired, I'm going to rewatch it. And you brought up some really important points, but just as something kind of funny, when I realized that my thyroid really was, well, not just my thyroid, but diagnosing myself with Hashimoto's and grasping at straws, first getting in the functional medicine space, I bought Brazil nuts. I was every single day, because I was eating like 2 Brazil nuts, and I was looking at foods rather than supplementation, because we can over supplement. I do believe that it is bad practice. You'll come up with a better, more eloquent way of saying it than that. But poor practice, like as a practitioner, like suggesting somebody else do that. I don't think I've ever said somebody should take selenium. Like you, a multivitamin. I do feel most people would benefit from like a broad multivitamin with many different things in it, high quality, thinking about if that person needs, methylation support, like should it be methylated vitamins? Most people would benefit from that, but not everybody. And I've met one individual that she was one of the very rare people that it doesn't work, and she got really nauseous and side effects, even though that's not common. So I'm always going to look at food first, and I'm going to like cast a wider net and look at, like you said, now I'm going to have this image of arsenic with
Yeah.
chicken. So thanks.
Yeah. So, and I want to add this piece to it. Like, I'm not saying that individual micronutrient strategies aren't appropriate. They are. Like, if I'm working with somebody who's got iodine deficiency,
Mhm.
I'm concerned about them eating massive quantities of like kelp or seaweed, right? Because of maybe the toxicity that's in those things, and some of them the iodine variability is
Mhm.
wildly different. But so there may be a reason. Even for selenium, if I know somebody's got high arsenic, we need to figure out where that's coming from their food, from their water supply. But
Yeah.
we could use selenium in that situation to say, man, I've got to put more selenium in here as an individual micronutrient because a lot of that's getting bound up, and I don't need a massive amount of B vitamins in general or other things in there. I really need, because the arsenic is maybe mostly influencing and binding up the selenium. This is where I need to do some targeted things. So I'm not
Mhm.
saying that individual micronutrient strategies aren't good, but in general, if you're the person who's just the patient who's saying, hey, I want to give should I buy one of these thyroid support
Yeah.
formulas? Should I should I buy individual bottles of things that can help the thyroid? I would say that's where my answer is no. Number one, do the fitness factors, eat a whole food based diet. Look at the things that you think you need to take a vitamin of, like an individual bottle of, and make sure you're eating that. And then if you can't get those things in, or you want to do a better job, maybe a digestive enzyme to help get more of the extraction
Yes.
from what you're eating. And then maybe some organ blend that's very rich in a lot of these key nutrients that we're asking for anyway. And then the multivitamin. So that's really, I want to quantify that or qualify that, because somebody may be listening as a physician saying, "Oh, you're saying no, individual micronutrient strategies aren't appropriate." They can be,
Mhm.
but I think they're more appropriate when you have a clinician who's really trying to target a specific issue, not from the general consumer who's just trying to say, "Oh, I think I need this. I need this," because that's the way people wind up on 40 bottles of supplements.
Yes. Yeah, and you actually brought up something right there at the end with the absorption and maybe a digestive enzyme. I'm thinking about if we're putting supplements in, how are we absorbing them? Are
Hmm.
we in a parasympathetic nervous system state when we're eating? Because
Hmm.
wherever you live, I'm driving around, people are eating while they're driving. They're yelling at the kids in the back. Like, are we sitting down mindfully eating? Likely a lot of us are not. So if we're not in a parasympathetic state, are we adequately breaking down the foods? Are
Hmm.
we potentially having this altered intestinal permeability?
Hmm.
So we could be taking all of these supplements, expensive supplements too. It could be
Yeah.
hundreds, even thousands of dollars a month I've seen.
Hmm.
And we might as well be putting them in the toilet, that we're not going to get anything out of them. And like you, I'm not against individuals, like individual types, like a selenium or whatever. But I think just going into it, like, well, I have something with my thyroid. I guess I'll pick up some selenium on the way home from work today. I don't necessarily think that's the best approach. And like you said, starting with the basics and testing.
Yeah.
If we need to, I would always prefer to test than guess,
Hmm.
but start with food. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody listens to a podcast and like selenium is really good for thyroid physiology, go, oh, well, maybe I need extra selenium. I'll take a selenium supplement. Then they hear somebody say, well, magnesium is good for the thyroid. So, okay, I'll take some magnesium as well. And then they find out that zinc is important. So I'll take a zinc, right? And now you just start adding things up. Um, and you may be really overdosing on some of these things, which a lot of these micronutrients are balanced in nature in the foods we eat. And so we get a balanced ratio. And there's probably no better example than, vitamin A and vitamin D. It's supposed to be a 4-to-1 ratio in the body.
Mhm.
And when you're just blasting your body with mega doses of vitamin D, Are you destroying that that balance? And is that potentially creating an issue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. So it is, we have to really think about what we're doing. And usually when we're using an individual micronutrient as a strategy, it's not meant to be long term. It's meant to be short term to create an outcome and then eliminate it in most cases, right?
Hmm.
So if you're doing something, if you need 4 digestive enzymes for every meal, you're managing your condition. You're not improving your condition, right? Like you should, the digestive enzyme is a great strategy, and to help break down food. Now, I like it as a long-term strategy, but one
Same.
digestive enzyme should be sufficient, not 4, right?
Hmm.
Not 5, right? It should be like, hey, a good quality one. Um, but most times when we're doing a strategy like, hey, you know what, we kind of need a little bit of methylated folate in here, or we need some folinic acid to try and make some change.
Hmm.
Um, they're usually shorter term strategies. There are some things that can be great longer term strategies, but it shouldn't be 30 individual bottles of supplements. We need to be thinking no food as an individual micronutrient. It's a complex of things, and probably for good reason.
Yeah, and actually this reminds me of somebody that I was talking to the other day, a lady that went through this copper program to heal her
Hmm.
thyroid.
Hmm.
And she said that her doctor said, "What are you doing? Everything is so much worse." Like
Hmm.
across the board, all her numbers were worse. And she said, "Well, I was told like by doing this copper protocol works for everyone." And I'm just thinking about it and like I it infuriates me because how on earth could everybody need the same thing and
Well, it
blindly
depends
like,
on, yeah, it depends on it, how devoted you are to that individual's belief patterns. And,
yeah,
if they come out with a book that kind of says that, copper is the cure, then, and you follow that blindly and think that that is the cure for every condition, you can see where people would be grabbing onto that as a potential solution for every condition.
yeah, and going back to iodine and you will really appreciate this. I have a lady that I was working with that she was going through this iodine protocol to remove all iodine from her diet because that was why she has Hashimoto's. And
Mhm.
her like health was just plummeting in every way and such food fear and AIP for years,
Mhm.
years, and no better. And like like doing the test to see iodine in the urine and like so afraid like it was going to show any iodine. I'm like, wait a second, like iodine's important. Like
Yeah,
it's yeah,
critically important, not just for your thyroid, for a whole bunch of other systems.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and so it's, there's some wonky things out there, and I think the premise is good. I think people come up with the ideas. You, me, we come up with our own thought processes, our own
Mhm.
beliefs, our own hypotheses, and everybody comes up with them. Um, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily correct 100% of the time for every individual.
Yeah.
So could copper, like in this situation, could copper help somebody? Sure. Um, could could doing a copper uh, protocol, or um, whatever Joe's zinc protocol be work for everybody? It probably isn't going to work for everybody. We see that with vitamin D. Vitamin D, and I know I get stuck on vitamin D, and there's everybody says like I get like, well, everybody says vitamin D is so good. Vitamin D is fantastic. It's a steroid. It works on suppressing the immune system, but at some point we have to stop this idea thinking that everybody is deficient. Instead, ask the question, well, why is everybody potentially deficient in the one vitamin D marker we passed? Why would they be deficient? Is it that they can't make it? They're not getting sun
Mhm.
exposure. They're on a statin. They've dropped their cholesterol too low, so there's not enough cholesterol in the skin. Is it because they have an inflammatory state and that vitamin D is going into their fat cells and expanding their fat cell storage ability and creating more obesity? Like what is it, right? But we don't think that way. We just think everybody's deficient. Everybody needs copious amounts of fish oil. And we've been taking more fish oil and more vitamin D in the last 2 decades than we've ever taken in the history of the world. And we're sicker than we've ever been in the history of the world, probably,
Yeah.
as a chronic illness piece.
Actually, I think didn't you have a podcast talking about this recently? I feel like I was listening to about like every so often there's the newest, not new, but a supplement of the moment that we're going to just shovel into our bodies, and it's supposed to like dramatically improve us. But why are we as a humans just going downhill? We're not getting better. We're getting worse in so many ways. I believe it's because of these generic approaches and latching onto anything as this is the be all end all, and then thinking about like dangerous levels of some of these supplements. Like I had a woman that she was taking selenium. She was doing like 800 milligrams a day. I was like, what? Like, how many of these are you taking? Because she said, well, I heard, it's good for my thyroid. So we can have like maybe a little bit can be helpful, but a lot can make us worse. So we have to factor in, we shouldn't need buckets of supplements. We are.
That's not functional medicine for sure, right?
No,
it's not functional medicine.
We're expertly crafted. All people, all of us, expertly crafted. So if something is going awry, we need to find out why. The answer isn't, well, I will thrive with, 45 supplements. My body just is deficient in all of these things. That is the same mentality as, we have a Prozac deficiency. So we take Prozac, right? It's in my mind, it's the same, and it's doing a disservice to people.
Yeah. And I probably have half a dozen people right now that are relatively new in care. And the only thing we are doing is eliminating the supplement load they came came to me with, and working on the lifestyle and the fitness factors. That's all we're doing, because I don't know who they are, right? If you're taking 10, 12, 15, 20 supplements per day or more, the blood panel I'm going to run is not who you are. That's who you are on all the supplementation. And so I want to see many times who this person is without them. And it is the rare person, as we wean down their supplements, that doesn't report improvement in their symptoms. And I've got patients that have, reduced, and a couple of them I met with just this week who have they've cut their supplement load, down, 80%, and they've seen 20, 30, 40, 50% improvement of their symptoms with just eliminating the excessive supplement load. So this is like that cautionary tale, like more is not better. And there isn't a magic solution most times in a box or bottle somewhere. So I think we beat that one dead. Let's move on to the next one, because we won't get through all these.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Despite normal thyroid labs, I still feel fatigued and depressed. Could there actually be a thyroid issue?
Sure. And I don't know what's normal, right? What was measured?
Yes.
What's normal? So what's normal? My TSH was normal, therefore my thyroid panel was normal. No, your TSH was normal, but we don't know if it's normal and appropriate, or abnormal or normal and inappropriate, right? So the full thyroid panel, to really assess full thyroid physiology, you need to run the full a full thyroid panel, TSH, total T4, total T3, free T3, free T4, reverse T3. You can run the antibodies and then look at the free T3, free T4 ratio, and then look at the other, look for the other patterns of potential tissue hypothyroidism. Do you have glucose resistance going on? Do you have fatty liver developing? Do you have reduced renal function? Do you have adrenal dysregulation markers? I think, did I say lipids elevated? But there's a number of different patterns, and I've done a Thyroid Thursday on this where, hey, here's 9 patterns of tissue hypothyroidism that you can look for. But that's really what you want to do. And then the next piece is we got to take a look at your health history, health timeline, see if there's potential things that could have triggered that cell stress response, and then look at your fitness factors and say, okay, what's not in very good shape here? Like, when we look at your emotional fitness, where do we rate that? Like, your emotional fitness is not very good. That means you may be perceiving, it may be a reality, but definitely perceiving more fear, more stress, more danger, and that's going to alter your physiology and kind of shift you to that sympathetic state, which is going to be exhausting to try and maintain for extended periods of time. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I agree. And thinking about, again, casting a wider net, because if we're coming to like fatigue and somebody is depressed, like it's not just about labs. And I would argue the most important thing, and there'll be people who disagree, it's fine, is not the lab value, but the person. Like how they feel, their state of mind about what's going on, and doing the foundational principles of health and wellness, and getting the support that somebody needs if this is how they're feeling. But at the same time, if we're not getting the full panel, if we're not looking at the whole picture, and again, we could have normal labs and still have, issues with hypothyroidism that are not showing up on the labs, then I want to know more about that person, what they've been through, exposures that they've had, like how are they, what are they doing like on a day-to-day basis, and then tie it together. So again, like, I don't know if we talked about it today or previously, that matrix, like looking at that individual's matrix, the different body systems and the way everything is interacting. So like for when I think about fatigue, right, and depression, they go together, but it could be, there's a long list of things that could cause fatigue and depression. So getting a better understanding, and instead of just, giving somebody a diagnosis of whatever and making that's the one thing, instead of, it's probably likely multifactorial. It's not just one reason. There's not just one reason why somebody is tired. There could be, 20 reasons why. Yeah. So understanding those things and really looking and digging deeper, these are the things that can shift somebody from a trajectory that they don't want to be on to a better trajectory. If we just wait for the disease to name it and drug us, are we getting on that better pathway? I would argue no. And we might actually be getting on a worse trajectory because of all the potential downstream ramifications from insert whatever the medication or supplement that we're shoving in when we haven't addressed the underlying reason for the symptom.
Right. Yep, I agree. Good. Let's hit the next one.
Okay. How important, and you talked about this a little bit, but how important is liver health in managing thyroid conditions, and what can I do to support my liver?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a broken record, but liver health is extremely important to every aspect of physiology, because that's where a lot of stuff comes in immediately after being going into the GI tract, and it comes into the hepatic system, into the liver, and then gets shunted back out into the bloodstream. almost everything that needs to be detoxified for the body, it needs to go through the liver. So the liver is critically important to overall health and well-being. What can you do to improve liver function? Go to part 3 of the thyroid debacle and read about each of those fitness factors and improve those. Like daily exercise, walking, strength training is going to improve your liver function and detoxification pathways. You're going to sweat things out. You're going to move lymph tissue around. It's going to be super helpful, and it's going to support not just the liver, but it's going to support GI health, which is going to help clear things out. So liver does phase 1, phase 2 detoxification. The dumping of things into the bile system is what my friend Kelly Halderman calls detox 2.5. And then phase 3 of detox is really what goes on in the GI tract and the elimination of things. So you can, by improving your diet, by improving your sleep, by improving the types of food you eat, by limiting the amount of alcohol you consume, by eliminating the toxins that we get from our food, and just following, the steps in that part 3 of the book, you're going to have a healthier liver. Now, I guess where they might be going is, should I take B vitamin? Should I take, should I do like a hydrogen peroxide cleanse or something like should I do a colonic? If you're going to do those types of aggressive things, but you haven't done the foundational things, I think you're kidding yourself, right? Are there multivitamin and detoxification pathways that can be very helpful, or strategies that can be very helpful for improving liver and gallbladder function? Absolutely. But I wouldn't, if you're just a lay person who's trying to improve their liver function, I wouldn't start with somebody's liver detox or, you know what, I'm going to eat 6,000 pieces of celery every day, and that's gonna do it.
No.
That you're trying to biohack or hack a system, and I don't think that's the right strategy. So I would say, number 1, work on improving your level of fitness and all those fitness factors we talk about, and I talk about in the book. You talk about it in your course that you have. Do those first because they don't cost anything. Regardless of your condition, you have to do them anyway. And then if you think you need to do something that's more aggressive, maybe reach out to a functional medicine practitioner who to work with and say, is this strategy appropriate and why or why not? And they can give you some insight. But I think there's a lot of goofy things out there that people think is doing detox, and I don't think they really understand what detox is, unfortunately. People that are saying these things, and sometimes the people that are following the recommendations.
You're absolutely right. And our body is doing it right now without us lifting a finger. We're designed to, again, thrive, survive, not just survive, but thrive. And we're breaking things down and we're detoxifying. So when I think about when people are asking me, because a lot of people come to me on these cleanses and and I'm like, how do you feel? Well, they're not coming to see me if they feel good. I'll tell you that. They're like, I don't feel any better. I'm like, well, why don't we stop that? Because clearly there's something else going on. And absolutely, what is somebody eating? One of my favorite prescriptions that I write, not really, is microgreens. I'm a fan, especially I have a lot of people that have aversions to vegetables. I was one of those individuals for 19 years of my life because I only knew corn. Sorry, nanny. And like I grew up, I wasn't exposed to like other things until I essentially was an adult. So like if somebody has this aversion, and I'm not talking about going crazy, like, cups and cups. And now we're like these juice cleanses and all these things that are ridiculous. In my opinion, they're ridiculous. But bringing in more real food. So somebody could take a broccoli supplement, right? I don't think I've ever recommended that because, again, is the body able to process it? What are they going to do with it? And we're going to get so much more from food. So I'm a fan of microgreens because they have so much more nutrient dense and they're really easy to put in things. I put them in a smoothie every day. And I'm not kidding. I prescribe smoothies for individuals unless they, for some reason, they don't like drinking things or they don't want something cold. They don't have to do anything that they don't want to do. But I have seen it as a game changer for their like individual skin, for their respiratory system. And they're like, is it really impacting the way I'm breathing? Like snoring goes away. And of course, they're not only doing a smoothie with microgreens, and there's other things in there like fruits and other things, but they're like talking about sleep and all of the other things that are important for detoxification. So that in and of itself, you know, is a whole, like you said, a whole part of my course is all about detoxification because it's that important, but it isn't like, here's your checklist, run through the checklist. And at the last steps, an enema. You know, I had a woman and that was what was in a program she did, like daily enemas. I'm like, did it work? She's like, no, I never felt any better. I'm like, I don't think that we were designed to have to go to these extremes. Like, how are we living our life? And this individual in particular, you know, very negative thoughts, not sleeping, very stressed out, lots of processed foods. When I'm thinking about this, it's like,
yeah,
what's an enema going to do when all the rest of these things like are not even addressed? So
yeah, and the enema is going to clean some things out, but but that's why they had to do it every day, because if you're only managing uh the 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 process and not fixing anything, then you got to keep doing it every day. You know, God bless them for hanging in there and doing daily enemas because it wouldn't be on the top of my list.
me either.
Um, but yeah, let's hit the next one.
Okay. Can practicing gratitude or other techniques influence thyroid function or help alleviate symptoms?
Let's say, yeah. I mean, I think, and it's tough in today's world because we spend maybe too much time, me included, we can get wrapped up in conversations that are detrimental to our health, right? Right now, you know, politics and what's going on in this year with we're getting into an election cycle and the craziness between two parties, and the divisiveness that's created between these two parties in the media. And if depending on what, it doesn't matter really which side you listen to, the other side is the demon, and it's a lot of negative, 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 negative. And so if you're getting a lot of negative information into your system constantly, um, it's going to drive a danger cell stress response, right? Versus the opposite. If you're grateful for the environment you have and grateful for your friends and grateful for all the things you have, that's going to create a greater sense of peace and harmony. That's going to release a different level of hormones and neurotransmitters in your system, which is probably going to promote less inflammation than the other models. So I think, yeah, gratitude is fantastic. I mean, I think we should every day, we should have, especially right before we go to bed, have some level of gratitude um, at the end of each day. Like, what are the three things I'm grateful for? Like, I'm grateful for my spouse, my kids, and their health, and you know, the relationships I have with my siblings. I mean, to me, those are, you know, key things you should be grateful for. Hey, today I'm grateful because I had the opportunity to meet somebody, or I had the opportunity to I was able to, you know, I'm grateful I would have the opportunity to buy X for my spouse or to buy X for me, right? I'm grateful that I have that opportunity to do that, but it's so easy to get caught in the other way. Me too. I mean, I can get easily caught up in some of the craziness that's going on, and I have to catch myself at times and be like, turn the noise off and get back to, you know, to reality, because there's only so much I can do, right, to influence what's going on. But what I do have a lot of influence over is my personal environment, my personal space, and my personal relationships.
Yeah, that's really important. And just like, I don't know if we talked about it today or a different day, that I did things backwards with my own health journey. Like I wanted
Mhm,
the answer, I wanted the magical supplement. That's why I'm so adamant that it doesn't work because it didn't make me better. And
mhm,
and I don't know many people that it does. I was very resistant to gratitude. And if I think about it, it'll make me sad for myself that I feel like I was depressed and maybe like a little bitter, like for what I was going through. I mean, thankfully it didn't last a very long period of time. But when I was thinking about things I was grateful for, I wasn't able to look past the negativity.
mhm,
Now I can see the power of reflection. Like you said, before you go to bed, getting off of our phones. And I'm human and I
mhm,
fail on a daily basis. And when I'm talking to people, like my patients or clients, and I'm letting them know, what do you think about trying this? And then I'm thinking, oh, I didn't do that yesterday. I
mhm,
share that with them because I think it's helpful to know that perfection doesn't exist. So
mhm,
it doesn't, just like if somebody is where I was, very ungrateful, right? To start by like finding something. So when I started this, I was like, I'm grateful for my husband. Well, which I am. You would think, why didn't that pop into my mind? Because I was in a dark, dismal place. And this was hyper focused on where I wasn't, what I wasn't getting out of life instead of the things that I had. So thinking grateful for my husband. And then my grandson popped into my mind. And obviously, I'm grateful for my grandson. So I
mhm,
love, like, I call it bookends, like to start our day and think about, you know, how is today going to be a great day? Like,
mhm,
we can think about like all the things we have to do, but wake up, do a check in. How do I feel this morning? Do I feel like I was rested and have like a moment of reflection for how we feel? And before we go to bed, to absolutely like gratitude and also reflecting on the day and like not what went wrong. And sometimes I do think we need to focus on, we it matters if things are not going the way that we want them to go. I'm not suggesting we put our head in the sand and we don't care about it. But before we go to bed is probably not the time to do that. It is not the time. Okay. Because then it's going to
yeah,
put us in a bad mood before we go to bed. And it's going to impact our sleep. So thinking about like what went right today, what am I grateful for? And without a doubt, there's no doubt in my mind that impacts everything because suddenly the danger signal the body's getting, the triggers, if somebody has any issue, which most, I don't know anybody that doesn't have some kind of an issue, then like that gas pedal that's on those triggers, like I think of it, it's not fun. This isn't like a fun fast car to drive. It's like driving into a storm or into a tornado. That's not fun. Like it helps to like remove that trigger because the immune system and the cells, our microbiome are getting the message that, oh wait, these are good things,
mm,
instead of just like a plethora of like terrible things, which we're bombarded with. Like you said, I try to stay out of politics because it's very stressful for me. But we're bombarded with stress all day, every day, especially because of these, right?
mhm,
Because I don't know about you, and I don't know if it was you or somebody else talking about at a stoplight and everybody's on their phones and like we can't just sit. We have to be doing, and I'm not perfect, right? I already said that.
mhm,
So I'm guilty of this too, but I want to reflect on those things. Like, what am I doing to just sit? Because when we're constantly scrolling, and are we grateful when we're doing this? I mean, likely we're stopping on an image of something that we wish we had.
mhm,
Somebody with their fancy car, someone with their perfect body. whatever it is, and then we're getting a message that we're not good enough. So it's like further driving our belief system, which is going to impact everything in our body.
Yeah, I agree. I think we got it. Let's hit the next one. We got time for maybe one or two more, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Awesome. Okay. Can acupuncture or other alternative therapies help manage symptoms of thyroid disorders?
Well, the problem is, I'm going to say yes, because we don't know if the symptoms are created by a thyroid disorder or they're created by something else, right? We assume that all these symptoms are thyroid related or they're caused by a thyroid disorder. And again, do we really have a thyroid disorder, or do we have an adaptive change in our thyroid physiology because of chronic cell stress? And it could be caused by, if you're thinking about chiropractic or PT or acupuncture, I've got a musculoskeletal issue that is creating pain and irritation and tissue damage. That's still going to trigger inflammatory mechanisms that may result in changes in signs and symptoms. So is that could we see downregulation of thyroid physiology as a result of that? Sure. But we can't just call a lot of symptoms thyroid necessarily related, because that's the problem. Oh, you're tired, that's a thyroid symptom. Oh, you're constipated, that's a thyroid symptom. Well, it's the sign of some level of altered function or dysfunction. We might see under conversion of thyroid hormone. Could it be just, hey, I couldn't make any thyroid hormone, so all these things are lack of thyroid hormone to begin with? Sure, but not everything is a thyroid condition, unfortunately, or going to be fixed with thyroid hormone. That's why I hate to say like a thyroid condition, because now somebody thinks its solution is more T3. But could acupuncture, chiropractic care, and PT potentially help some neurologic disorders, metabolic disorders, organ disorders? Absolutely. I mean, chiropractic care and acupuncture weren't developed for neck pain and back pain per se at the early days. They were really started for many times more organically based conditions. So, they wound up becoming, I think, sometimes more musculoskeletally oriented, pain syndrome type. But the old, spinal manipulation it's either the first or the second oldest profession, depending on what you consider the oldest profession, right? And there's hieroglyphics of people getting manipulated way, way back. But the first, what they talk about is the first modern day chiropractor or chiropractic patient wasn't being seen for a joint or musculoskeletal complaint. They were deaf, and somebody, they got adjusted essentially, and they were able to hear. So, but they weren't necessarily saying, "Hey, I got this kink in my neck. Can you fix me?" Necessarily, it's a different story. So I think a lot of these healing modalities can be really helpful in reducing neurologic and physiologic stress. So I think they all can have a benefit if done appropriately, right? I'm a huge advocate as a chiropractor myself. I'm a huge advocate of chiropractic care done well, and continue to get chiropractic care. I think there's some things that are not so great in the world of chiropractic. I think from a business standpoint, you see people that are like, go in for their initial, hey, I've got a neck issue, and okay, we're going to need to see you 365 times for the next 2 years, and that person's making you make a year contract agreement for 3 times a week, for months on end. I don't know that that's what the foundation is, but I should say it this way. I know where that came from. That came from a business model of keeping your income high, but I don't know that it's necessarily all in the best interest of the individual. And the maybe the chiropractor who practices that way would be like, well, you have to adjust the spine constantly to restore normal physiology. If you need to be adjusted 3 times a month for 3 times a week for months on months and months on end, then you're not
Yeah.
addressing the root cause anyway, right? Same with acupuncture. Acupuncture is great, but if you need constant chronic treatments, you're probably not addressing the root cause. If you need constant PT for the same hamstring pull over and over again, you're getting the wrong support, right? And it's the same argument that we're making for you need the same supplements chronically for years and years, or you can't function appropriately. Then you're missing the point of what that therapy or that technique is supposed to be. So I went long-winded, but the short answer is yes, I think they could be beneficial at times for organic type conditions like a thyroid condition, an inflammatory condition.
I agree. I've never had acupuncture. It's something I've been interested in. I've done some research on it just because I'm a nerd. Chiropractic, I feel like it was a game changer for me. But I will say this was, especially when I was really going, I didn't go for 365 visits, just like a short amount of time, but I literally couldn't turn my neck. I wasn't going for thyroid. For my
Hmm.
thyroid, I was going because I literally couldn't turn. But I
Hmm.
was drinking 10 Cokes a day.
Yeah. So no wonder you
I,
couldn't maintain a correction, right?
Eric, I love airing all my dirty laundry on your
Hmm.
podcast. I was drinking, and the chiropractor I was seeing, she's retired. She was amazing. And she worked with me on diet. It was very holistic. And I stopped with the soda. And it made it was the soda. I mean, that because I drank it every day. It was highly inflammatory. So what she did worked in the moment, but then like the next day it was back. And I
Yeah.
even tested it, right? I was like, yeah, she's really smart. I trust her, but pop open that can. I feel so much better. I'm really not even kidding. I did this. And I was drinking it and I was about halfway through and I went like this and I had that pain again. And I'm like, this is my body saying, this is poison that I'm
Yeah.
putting in. So yeah, I think we need to understand what's going on because I could have just kept drinking it because it worked. Like what
Hmm.
she did for me made me feel a lot better. And I could have just avoided, like, I'm not going to make any changes and I'm just going to come here 3 times a week forever. But what else is happening? Like, what else is happening under this, like under the hood, like inside of my
Yeah.
body? It's holding up that neon sign, like, Tara, maybe this
Yeah.
is really not good for you.
And listen, I'd love, I enjoy getting adjusted. And if you had an unlimited pocketbook and you wanted to go in and get adjusted every day, God bless you, go do it. But you might need intensive care initially, but over time, if you can't maintain the corrections, then you have a diet, a lifestyle, an inflammatory process that you're not addressing. So, um, any of my fellow chiropractors are hearing this and say, you sell it. I mean, listen, I did a lot of chiropractic very early on. I've done less and less over the years because I focus on functional medicine. But, that's the model I was taught from a business standpoint was, hey, you get them in here 3 times a week for 12 weeks, and you do 2 times a week, and then you do 1 time a week, and then you do once every 2 weeks, then once a month. And this is your patient, you know, this is how much you need to make off each pay. I mean, it was very business oriented. I just didn't jive with it, and that's where I really struggled. Is that especially um, when you're in conflict with what's best for the patient and what's best for your pocketbook, that's a bad
Mhm.
place to be. But it just never jived for me, and I just it's one of the reasons I don't. I kind of moved away from it a lot because I would see the same people in with the same problems on a consistent basis. And you would want to talk to them about their diet and their nutrition. And some of those people wanted to listen and do those things. And some people were just like, hey, just let's adjust me. And that's fine. We want to help them with what they want. But my thought process was only if you're needing regular visits, like a couple times a week, month after month after month, we're not addressing the real issue here. And we have to be realistic about that. There's a point where you go, I'm managing you. I'm not helping you. I'm not fixing you. Like there's something else here. And I really prefer to try and find the answer than to manage. Um, and that's in both chiro and in, in functional medicine as well. So let's hit one more and then let's call it a day.
Okay. Are there any lesser known environmental factors such as electromagnetic fields or heavy metal toxicity that could be affecting my thyroid?
Yeah, I think there's the possibility. Now, the electromagnetic field, this is a super controversial topic. Um, and I don't know that we fully know the answer, but I've seen and read a bunch of science on why it is, and I've read some stuff on why it isn't. The reality is, I think it could be for some people, they can be very sensitive to it. How do you avoid electromagnetic frequencies and stuff? It's like near impossible.
Mhm.
But I do think, we kind of want to minimize uh, the load as much as we can. So, but I do think it can create some issues. I mean, there are some studies that they did with people with phones, that the people who had that greatest incidence of talking with their phone to their ears had a higher incidence of thyroid damage and disease. And I think that I forget there's a bunch. I think a lot of those studies came out of Japan initially, and I'm sure there's been more of them since. Maybe China. Um, but it does seem like there's potentially more issues. So,
Mhm.
like, I don't I like my headphones that aren't aren't wired, but I don't like them from a health perspective. I like everything wired if I'm going to listen, if I'm going to use them versus the the wireless Bluetooth based things. Does it is it bad? I honestly I don't know with certainty, but I think it's better if we can minimize those things. As far as other environmental toxins, yeah, there's a lot of things out there. It's in our food, it's in our water, it's in our air. I think it's in it's in our carpets, it's in our
Mhm.
the things. Staining step rails at the moment, and are those chemicals toxic to the system? Sure, they are. But you're never going to escape all these things, and you can't live
Mhm.
in a bubble. So I think what we want to do is just be aware and try and minimize the load. And when we do need to be around or utilize things that are maybe a little bit more toxic and problematic, we want to, do it in the safest environment possible. And then m- optimize our health with those fitness factors, because
Mhm.
if I'm around a bunch of toxic substances that I'm getting absorbed into my body via skin or air, right? If I'm exercising, eating well, sleeping well, I'm going to have the best ability to detox these things,
Mhm.
right? But there's a lot of things that can influence it. We're all exposed to these things, but even when it comes to the immune driven problems, it's not every toxin creates a problem. Like,
Mhm.
I'm exposed to mercury, therefore I've got a problem. Maybe not. Your body may be able to tolerate and remove it. There's mold in my environment. Yeah, but is it creating a health issue for you? I don't know. Well, okay, then let's just deal with the mold and clean it up and move on. You know, um, there are tests to see if you've lost tolerance to these antibody tests to some of these things, and we can say, yeah, you are have lost tolerance and your immune system does not like this stuff. But there's people that are exposed to things and they think it's creating a health issue. I was exposed to mold when I was 6, and therefore I can't be around mold ever. No, no, not necessarily.
Mhm.
Right? The mold response you had when you were 6 and now you're 52 that may have created some challenge back then, but it may not be the reason that you're sick today. But people can carry some of that stuff with them. Hey, I was
Yeah.
exposed to this stuff when I was younger, therefore it's probably causing my current health issue. It might have created some challenges, but it also may not. I had Lyme when I was 14, and therefore I'm a chronic Lymey. I'm carrying that Lyme with me for the rest of my life, and that's part of my chronic illness. Maybe, or maybe not, right? Maybe it's your belief that you have chronic Lyme that's contributing
Yes.
to your illness versus the fact that you have chronic Lyme. So we have to be careful. We want to be as clean as we can in our environment. We've got to be careful not to carry some of these exposures to things around like a backpack
Mhm.
with us for the rest of our life, because that too, the perceived stress of these things can do as much damage as the real exposure to these things.
Yes, 100% yes. And I was one of those people that did the tests from Cyrex on myself, making antibodies to everything, literally everything I tested. So I lived in the fear mode for a long time, and I don't feel that way anymore, because again, I'm like, if something like that is going on, I would say it's an appropriate response. The immune system sees something like, and we're bombarded with things. So I look at like compounding things. So is somebody exposed and they have their earbuds in all day? Do they sleep in them? A lot of people
Mhm.
sleep in them. You know, what other things are they doing? Are they drinking water? And it's really poor quality water. That's something that's relatively easy to figure out. Or I do think most people should have a filtration system. Or and what are there's a whole list like you already mentioned, but what are we thinking? Like, what are we
Mhm.
thinking about it? I will say, I can, I don't have any superpowers that I know of, but if I don't keep my phone normally in my pocket. Like I keep it in my purse or on my desk, because when it's on me, I feel like some type of, it's not doing anything. I'm not on it. Nothing is playing, but I can almost sometimes feel like a vibration. So
Mhm.
for me, that's like my body saying, maybe take it out of your pocket. Like I might be more, hate this word, but sensitive to things, maybe with the state of the things that I've went through. But I would also say to that, somebody that's been exposed to something when they were 6, let's say they're 56 now, it's a piece of the story. Could that have
Mhm.
shifted their health trajectory? Absolutely. Is that then mediating their system? It could be trigger and a mediator. Is it mediating things? I would say highly unlikely. If it was that long ago, it's possible. We can have pathogens. They could stay, our body's really good at keep holding on to stuff, right? It's possible. But is that the one thing? In my experience, it is never just one thing. And some people will die on that sword.
Mhm.
And I've met them. And
Mhm.
that's usually not an individual that would jive with me. So, like
Yeah.
me and them together, because I don't agree that, it is 100% mold. That's the only thing, especially when you talk about the fitness factors, I talk about the bottom of the matrix. Those things are not a focus, and they're not sleeping. They have a horrible mindset. They, lots of stress. They're eating, I don't have time to cook. I don't have time to eat. So what'd you eat today? Out of the vending machine, out of a gas station. Okay. Do you think that could have anything to do with your signs and symptoms? No, it's the molds from when I was 6.
Yeah. And so the challenge me is that you can drag that idea that it's the mold, and let's say it is that, okay, that the mold exposure you had when you're 6 sets your immune system and the trajectory of your health down a certain path. Um, if you hold on to the idea that that is still the problem, then how are you going to recover from that, right? If you
Mhm.
believe that that set you down that path, this goes back to the belief process. Like, what do I believe? I believe that caused my health problems. Well, I can't go back and undo that, right? The only thing I can do is take a look at what are your current stressors that I can reduce or eliminate, and that's how I'm going to improve your health. If you believe that an exposure you had at 6 is the driving force as to what's causing your current health conditions, you're not going to be able to go back and change it. The only thing you can change is your current state. So what are the current stressors that I can manage? And if one of those is a belief of that all the chronic or all the past experiences are still the issue, you're in trouble, right? Because you're carrying those with you as a perception. That doesn't mean we don't want to see your timeline, your health history, because when we see your timeline health history, we could say, okay, antibiotic, antibiotic, gut problem, antibiotic, hormone dysregulation, abnormal cycles, pill, right?
Huh.
We're not going to go back and say, hey, that antibiotic at this way back then is the reason for everything going forward. We can't go back and we could say that may have started that response, but I can't change the fact that you had the antibiotic when you were 3, like 26 times, like when you were 3, because you had chronic ear infections. The only thing I can do is say, yes, that probably had some factor on changing the trajectory of your health and your gut biome. But a lot of the things you're doing today is also creating or contributing to your current state. Because you could have somebody who had lots of antibiotics as a kid who changed their gut biome, and that changed their gut biome, but because of a healthier lifestyle and better decision making as they started to get into the teenage years and adulthood, they didn't have the same consequences. So the story is important. What happened is important. I want to know that, you want to know that, so we know how we got here. And we're realizing that what you just got diagnosed with yesterday didn't start yesterday. It was a process. But once we look at that, we say, okay, but what is in this whole story? What's currently a stressor that I can reduce or eliminate? That's what we need to put our time and attention on for the most part, right?
Absolutely.
Perfect. All right, let's wrap it up. We'll call an end to this one. I think we almost got a dozen or so of these knocked out today.
This is the most yet.
Most yet. So we're getting better at it. So anyway, this was Q&A. I think it's number 12, 13, somewhere around there. So we'll get this out. We're trying to put out one a month until we get through them all. But if you have questions, obviously reach out to Tara. You can reach out to me on Instagram at my office, email office@rejuvegencenter.com, and give us the questions. We'll keep doing them as long as everybody finds value in it. All right. Tara, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Eric.